Welcome to a series of Qualtrics tutorials where you will learn the basics of this robust software. Qualtrics is a new survey software the University of Wyoming has adopted that makes it easy to collect feedback from clients, stakeholders, and participants in our educational programs. This platform is known to be significantly better than what was previously used. It has more features and is responsive on mobile devices. You'll access Qualtrics using your UIO credentials through the university's direct login portal. If you don't have UIO credentials, contact C&T Manager David Ketto for assistance. Let's get started. When using Qualtrics, it's recommended to use either Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox. So to log in while on your web browser, type in uio.qualtrics.com. If you're on a UW system, SSO will automatically log you in. If you're on a non-UW system, you'll be asked for your UW credentials. Once you're logged in, you'll be directed to your projects page, which will automatically display the surveys you've created. If you look at the top right corner of the page, you'll notice that there are 5 primary pages. We are already on the projects page. This is where you'll build and manage your surveys and response data. You'll notice in the top left corner that there are several ways to organize your projects after you've created them. If you click on the 3 dots on the right of a survey, there's going to be many options. When you activate the survey, you'll allow it to receive responses. You can send the survey to someone else where you can both collaborate on its creation and analysis. You can preview a survey to get a sense of how it works before you activate it. When you choose to distribute your survey, you'll have many options on how to make that happen, including sending through email, creating a link on the web, and even sharing through social media. And at the bottom, you can view the data, analysis, and reports of the information you've collected. If you click on the directories link, it'll take you to the page where you can create and manage mailing lists. All you have to do is click the button Create List. So if you're planning to send multiple questionnaires or surveys to the same people, you can set up a directory, similarly to how we create listservs through Outlook. You can also create sample lists, and it'll send your information to a group of random people from a specific mailing list. Pretty cool. On the Actions page, you can convert survey responses into measurable tasks. For example, if you have a question that asks if a participant would like more information on how to prevent weed growth in their garden, you can create an action that sends you an email every time someone responds with yes, so you can contact this person to provide them what they need. Just click on the Create an Action button. You can also go to this page to toggle on and off each action and to edit, rename, copy, or even delete any of the actions for the surveys that you've created. The Libraries page is where you can store and access all of the surveys, graphics, messages, and other file types that you have or would like to use in your forms. This allows you to reuse anything you've already created for products that you make. Lastly, by clicking on the Help page, you can either contact Qualtrics support or go to their support website to find training videos or access descriptions and guides on how to use this tool. If you would like additional training with Qualtrics, you can check the IT WyoLearn catalog for frequent, free, live workshops on the basics. You can also go to basecamp.qualtrics.com and take the free self-paced on-demand course. Now you have a general overview of how to get started and become familiar with the basic features of Qualtrics. Once a survey has been created, make sure you're in the survey editor. That's what this page looks like right here. When you create a new project, you'll automatically be taken here. If you created the survey at a previous time and would like to jump into the editor, simply click on the survey from the projects page. There are quite a few buttons and tabs on the survey editor. We're going to work through a logical progression of creating a new survey. Each feature will be covered when the appropriate time occurs. The first thing many people will want to do is to customize the look and feel of the survey. This can be done by clicking on this link, and it'll allow you to set a theme, layout, style, logo, and more. Choose a theme from the top tab. The University of Wyoming has already included several pre-built themes that can be used. There's the UW Dynamic theme or the UW COVID theme. You can also choose a preset theme by Qualtrics. Click on this link here and go to Presets. I can click on Glacier Mountains. Maybe I like Cherry Tree. There's lots of different options here. Or You can also keep the theme blank, and you can end up creating your own theme as you go through the process. So you'll want to make sure that you pick a theme, whatever it may be. I'm going to choose the UW COVID theme. Next, you want to choose a layout. Preview each option to pick your preference. I kind of like the modern look, so I think I'm going to go with that, but you have 3 different options that you can choose. There's also the general settings that you can adjust, like my next button and my previous button. Maybe I want it to actually be spelled out in all capital letters. Maybe instead of previous, I want it to say back. You can also create a progress bar. So I'm going to choose the first option here, and notice that the progress bar comes at the top, 0 to 100%. I think I want it on the bottom of the survey. I think that looks better. And I've decided that maybe I don't want the percentages up there. So I'm going to choose without text, so it's a little bit more minimalistic. You can also switch questions per page and also add information about a header and a footer. I'm going to leave those blank for now. You may also want to adjust the style of your survey. Maybe you like the theme you've chosen, but you'd like to change the fonts and the colors. You can do that right here. If you'd like the official UW colors, these are the actual hex codes. You can also find these hex codes on the UW marketing website, or you can change the colors to whatever you want it to be. Because I've chosen a UW theme, I'm going to stick with the UW colors. You can also change the font, the contrast, and question spacing along with how large the question and the answer text is. I'm okay with this information, so I'm going to keep it there. The Motion tab allows you to create transitions and other more advanced features. You can play around with these and see some of the effects more easily by viewing them on the sample survey if you haven't created any questions in yours yet. The sample survey can be found up here in the top right corner. Simply click on that button and it will show you a different survey so that you can see some of these motion graphics. I'm going to leave these fine right here. Then you can also add a logo. I think this is important to add a logo to promote branding in the University of Wyoming along with UW Extension. So I already have a logo image up here. I can change the image or add any image I want, and then I can determine where I want on my survey. So I've already put it on the left side and floating towards the top of the page. You can also adjust any sort of background information. This is where if you want to create a color background, you can simply click on that button and you can choose whatever color you want, or you can change the photo. This is especially important if you've created a blank theme, because then you can adjust the background however you like. Notice that there's also an overlay color to be light or dark. And in this option, I prefer the light overlay, so I'm going to choose that, along with some other things at the bottom. So since Qualtrics is also responsive to mobile devices, you can toggle between the mobile view and the computer view so that you can see what it looks like on a phone. I think this is important so that we can make sure that what we're adding is also easily viewable on our mobile devices. So once the survey looks and feels exactly how you want it, go ahead and click on the green Save button. Now it's time to add some questions to your survey. If you have questions from previous surveys in your library, you can import them into this survey by clicking on the Import Questions button. Otherwise, click on the green Create a New Question button. Now the first question has already been created for us. If we click on that question, a cluster of options is presented on the right side. This is where we can choose how we want the question to look. If you want to change your question type, simply click on the green button at the top. When I click on that, there are a lot of options that are presented. There are some options too that aren't even questions, which is the static content. So if I want to add a descriptive text or maybe some instructions for these questions, I can do that by clicking here. I can also add an image and maybe even an image with a text or a URL as well. Maybe I want a multiple choice question. If I go over to the arrow on the right, I'll see that there are a lot of different options that are provided for multiple choice questions, and I can choose the look of the type of question that I want. I can also choose a matrix type question, and notice that you can see Likert scales or even text entry forms, profiles, all sorts of different options. If you want someone to do a text entry, you can go to the text entry question and notice that you can choose single line, multi-line, you can have a password as an option. So there are a lot of different types of questions here that you just may want to play around with to figure out which question is right for you. I want to start my survey off with a question to gather personal information from my respondents. One of the easiest ways to do this is by creating a text entry question and turning it into a form. So I'm going to go to my multiple choice question type. I'm going to go down to text entry and then click on form. Now, this type of question may be especially useful later on if I plan on sending a follow-up email to respondents, because I can have Qualtrics use this information to send out the email. So I'll talk about that a lot more later, but a form question may be super useful if you want to use this information for later. So once I get this form question set up, I'll click on the type of question, and I'm just going to say, please provide us with your personal information below. Once I have that, notice that I have some choices. Now, typically these form questions usually ask the same things. So what you can do is go over to the right-hand side and click on automatic form fields, and it will add the standard information that people tend to ask. You can also change it from 7 fields to 5 fields, 3 fields, whatever you'd like. If you want to do that, you need to unclick the automatic form fields, and it goes back to 3. If I want to add 4, 5, however many you want, I can do that. If I go back to the automatic form fields, I'll notice that I do want their name, but I don't really need any of this other information. So I'm just going to go ahead and not do the automatic form fields, and I'll just fill in my own fields. So I know that I'm going to want first and last name. I'm going to separate those fields though, because I think it's going to be easier when I try to create some emails for later. So first name, and then it will be last name. And then I would also like their email address, because I know that I'm going to want to send some follow-up emails to them later. And so that's how you create a form question to gather basic information. Now, since many survey questions are multiple choice, I'm going to show you how to create this simple question type. So the first thing I'll do is click on the green Create a New Question button. Naturally, it is going to default to a multiple choice, which makes this a lot easier. Once I know that I'm on multiple choice, I'll go ahead and type in the text that I need. So my question is going to be, which age group do you consider yourself a member? Then if I simply click the tab button, it will move on to the choices. Once again, I can choose automatic choices if I'd like. Unfortunately, these choices aren't going to be relevant to what I'm asking, but I can go to this drop-down menu and see if any of these do, and they really just aren't. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my own options here. And so I'm going to choose youth, ages 6 to 12. Now, if I want to add a different option where they can simply type in their information, I can also do this as well. And this is usually good when you want to have a question that requires an other response. And by doing that, I can click on other, and then I'll click on the down arrow right here, and then I can click allow text entry. And by doing that, now somebody can type in whatever answer that they want if it doesn't relate to the options that I've already provided. So this is just how you create a simple multiple choice question. Now let's say I want to give some instructions or describe information to my survey participants. Maybe I'd like to have a group of questions that gather background information. You can explain this by creating a question that's simply a descriptive text. So I'm going to click on the Create a New Question button, and this time I don't want it to be multiple choice. I want it to be a text entry box or a descriptive text. So I'm going to click on that, and that's going to go ahead and get rid of any of the options that were there, and I can simply click whatever text that I want here. So I'm going to go ahead and write, please answer the following questions to help us get to know you better. So those are going to be my instructions. And what I can do is go ahead and move this to the top, because I obviously do not want this to be the third part of my question. So I'm going to click on the arrow button, and that's going to move it all the way up to the top. So now my respondents know that these questions that they are about to answer are going to be some background information questions. Let's say that I'd like to figure out which county the participant is from. I can create a new question by pressing the green button once again, or I can press the green plus sign at the bottom or the top of a question, depending on where I want that new question to be located. Since I want this question to be after the last one, I'm just going to click on the bottom plus button. Once I do that, it's going to automatically create a multiple choice question. Now, I kind of want a multiple choice question here, but I actually want it to be a drop-down question because I want my participants to choose which county that they are from. So this is a multiple choice question, but it's a different type of multiple choice. So I'm going to hover over the multiple choice question type and go over to the arrow, and I'll see a drop-down list. I'm going to click on that, and it'll create a drop-down arrow where I can add all of my choices. So the first thing I'll do is go ahead and write the instructions for the question. And for this one, it's going to be, which county in Wyoming do you live in? And then I'm going to simply add all of my choices for what the counties are. So my first one is going to be Albany County, then Bighorn, Campbell, Carbon, Converse, etc. And so I can add all of those drop-down options that way. And then the respondent will simply be able to click on the drop-down menu and go through alphabetical order to easily find the county that they live in. I'd also like to know how my participants are feeling about the quality of service that they've experienced this year in their community. So I'm going to create a matrix question for that. So what I'll do is I can either, again, press the green button, or I can click the plus sign and it adds a new question. I'm going to go over to the question type, and this time I'll choose matrix table. And then notice that there are a lot of different options that I have. For me personally, I'm going to choose the Likert single answer option because that's what works best for my question. Now you'll notice with this matrix type question that there are statements on the left and there are scale points on the right. The statements are going to be more specific to what you're trying to ask, and the scale points are going to be more about gauging the perception of whatever it is that you're asking. So for statements, I'm going to add the things that I would like to know. And so specifically, that's going to be quality of service and helpfulness of educators and accessibility of resources. Accessibility of resources. And then also make sure you add your question type so they know what they're responding to. And so my question is going to be, how would you rate your experience with UW Extension this past year? So now I have my question in there. I have my actual statements here. And now the cool thing about these matrix questions is that Qualtrics can give you options pre-populated. So if I go up to the top, I can see to create automatic statements or automatic scale points. I don't want to create automatic statements because I want that to be personal to what I'm asking, but I would like to create some automatic scale points. So if I click on that, it will populate to the disagree, agree spectrum. And to be honest, that doesn't really work with what I am asking here. So if I click on the disagree, agree part up here, it will give me a very large list of different options that I can choose from. Now for me, I think the most appropriate option is going to be the satisfied or dissatisfied scale. So I'm going to click on that. And now I'll see that I actually have 7 different options here for responses. And I think that's actually too much for what I'm asking for. So once again, I can go up to the scale points and I can reduce that down to 5. And I think this is a little bit more manageable. I can also change these to have specific wording if I want to make edits to that as well. I'm okay with this response, so this is going to be how I set up my matrix question. So again, matrix questions are really good for getting a judge on how someone is feeling about something based on what you're asking. These are just a few of the different types of questions that you can create in your survey. Make sure to play around with the various types, as there are a lot of options that Qualtrics offers to meet pretty much any need you may have. If you want to create a survey that's longer and you want to organize it, you may want to consider creating question blocks, which are sets of questions. For example, the first few questions in your survey might be in a block called Introduction, and the rest of your survey questions are in a block called Main Survey. Blocks are also useful for conditionally displaying specific questions. So maybe you'd like to create one survey, but you'd like to ask specific questions based on the age group of the participant. When you first create your survey and enter the Survey tab, you might notice it already includes one block. So the survey questions we've created so far are all in one block. I'm going to go ahead and rename this block Introduction so that I can better organize the survey. I can do that by clicking directly on the default question block and typing in the name that I want. Now, I know that I'm going to want some additional feedback from respondents based on their responses to the last question in the survey, which was, how would you rate your experience with UW Extension this past year? So I'm going to create a new block to separate those questions. I can do that by clicking on the Add Block button at the bottom of the page. Then I'll rename this block like I did to the first set of questions. I'm going to call it Bad Experience. And that's because I want to ask more follow-up questions to those who were not satisfied with our services this past year. And I'll discuss how we can go through that process later. I've now added 2 questions to my Bad Experience block. Once you have questions created in a block, there are a lot of options available. If you click on the Block Options tab on the right side of the block, those options are listed. They're pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend a whole lot of time going over those. But I do want to point out the ability to copy these questions to your library. If you do this, it could be useful in other surveys if you're asking the same questions. So simply save the block to your library and you can import it into another survey. You can use display logic to create a survey that is customized to each respondent. When a specific question or answer choice pertains only to certain respondents, you can set display logic on it so that it shows conditionally based on previous information. You can choose to conditionally display both questions and answer choices, allowing you to create a survey that's dynamically adapted to your respondents' answers. Now let's go back to the last question I created in the introduction block of my survey. That question was, how would you rate your experience with UW Extension this past year? If a respondent indicates that they're not satisfied with their experience, I'd like to know more information to help prevent that in the future. So I've created the Bad Experience block to get more information from those respondents. In this block, I have 2 questions to gather that information. So for those who are satisfied, I'd like them to continue on with the survey, and they don't need to answer these additional questions on their experience. So I'm going to use display logic to direct a respondent to those additional questions only if they were not satisfied. To do this, I'm going to click on the first question they'll be answering if they weren't satisfied with their experience. Then I'm going to go over to the Actions panel on the bottom right, and I'm going to click Add Display Logic. While here, I'm going to set the conditions to display the question. So it says display this question only if the following condition is met. I'm going to choose my option, which for this is the question. I'm going to select the question, and technically our question that we are choosing to create conditions for is question 10. Then there's going to be a lot of choices that are available. Now, I want to know whether or not these people are satisfied with our service. So there are actually 2 options that show that they are not satisfied. That is being somewhat dissatisfied and extremely dissatisfied. So for each option, quality of service, helpfulness of educators, and accessibility of resources, I want to know whether or not they are satisfied for those types. So I'm actually going to create a lot of different conditions here. So the first one is going to be quality of service. I'm going to select somewhat dissatisfied because if they choose that option, I want this new question to be displayed. Then I'm going to click the green plus button. That way I can add another condition. It's going to populate all of this other information. And so I'm just going to go back to that option and I'm now going to click extremely dissatisfied. Then I'll repeat this process for each one of those categories. So for helpfulness of educators, somewhat dissatisfied. Extremely dissatisfied. Now I'm going to add one for accessibility of resources, somewhat dissatisfied, and extremely dissatisfied. Now, if you pay attention over here on the left-hand side, there are and or options. Now, this is tricky because in its current setting, it would only display this new question if the person responded to all of these options as either extremely dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied. And I want to display that question if they respond to either or of those questions. So I'm actually going to click or. That way, if they respond to extremely dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied for even just one question or one category, this question will display. I'm also going to click the in-page box because I want to make sure this question is viewed on the same page as the rest of the survey. Then I'll go ahead and click Save. Once I do that, you'll see the conditions that are set above this question. then I'm going to go through the same process for my next question that I also want to be displayed. So I'm going to click on the question, I'm going to add the display logic, and I'm going to go through the same process. This question will be showed if they respond a certain way for question 10, which is extremely dissatisfied, or somewhat dissatisfied, extremely dissatisfied for all of these options, or for any of these options really. And then I'm going to make sure it is or, because I want this question to show if they even just choose one of these options. It's going to be in page. I'll click save. So now we can clearly see that each one of these questions has display logic conditions set for it. Another thing to realize is if you want to remove these or edit them, you can click on the down arrow and it gives you the option of editing or of deleting those conditions. Now, I recommend adding display logic only when you have one or two conditional questions that you want to ask. If there are more questions than that, it's actually going to be easier to add branching logic, which is what I'll explain in the next video. If you'll be asking more than two conditional questions, it'll be easier to add branch logic instead of display logic, which essentially means you'll create the same conditions for an entire block of questions instead of individual questions. In order to add branch logic, your questions need to be in a block. I already have my questions in the bad experience block. So now I need to go up to the survey flow tab, which is at the top of the page. When I click on this, it shows me the flow of my survey. And right now, it just shows that I have two question blocks. So now I want to create the branching in order to add the conditions to display the bad experience questions based on the responses to one specific question in the introduction. So since this relates to the introduction branch, I'm going to click on that and I'm going to click add below. Then it gives me the options of all the things that I want to add to this flow. And I would like to add a branching option to this flow. So I'm going to click branch and I'm going to add the element that I want to be branched. So the element that will actually be branched is an additional block of questions. So I'll click on block and then select the bad experience block of questions. So now I've created this branch, but I need to set the conditions. So in order for the bad experience block to show, I'm going to add the conditions by clicking on the add a condition button. While on this part, I'm going to do the same process that I did for the display process, the display logic when I was adding conditions there. So it's going to be based off of a question. The question is going to be the same one as before, which was the experience question. That's question 10. And then I'm going to select the same conditions. So based on before, I know that if they answer extremely dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied for quality of service, helpfulness of educators, and accessibility of resources, that I want the bad experience block of questions to show. So I'm going to start off with quality of service, somewhat dissatisfied. Then I'm going to click the green plus again, and now I'm going to do extremely dissatisfied. And I'm going to do that same process that I did when I was choosing display logic. And once again, I want to make sure that these are saying or instead of and, because I want the bad experience block to show if they choose only one of these options and not all of these options. And then I click OK, and this logic has been created. Now, the cool thing about branching logic is all of these conditions have been created for the entire block of questions. So I only need to set this up once. This is why it's useful when you have more than one or two questions to do branching logic, because it saves a lot of time. Now, if a certain question is answered then a certain way, then the bad experience questions will show up, which is exactly what I was trying to do. So we have set up branching logic. Now that I've added branching logic, my survey actually has branching logic and display logic for the same questions, and that's really unnecessary because either one will work. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to just delete the display logic options because I already have branching logic created and that's a little bit more efficient for me, so that's the one that I'm going to keep. So I'm going to go over to the arrow on my display logic and I'm just going to remove that logic for those two questions. So just keep in mind that when you're creating any sort of logic scenarios, You really only need to choose one of those options. Both display and branch logic work perfectly well. Just pick whichever option that you're most comfortable with and that works efficiently for you. You can also add skip logic, which allows you to send respondents to a future point in the survey based on how they answer a question. It's a little bit simpler than display logic and branching logic, but participants can only be skipped forward in the survey and only within the same question block. Since I'm sending this survey out to a random group of Wyomingites, I want to see how many people are engaging with UW Extension. So I'm going to create a question for that. I also don't want the respondent to continue the survey if they haven't interacted with Extension at all this past year. I'll use the skip logic feature to make this happen. The first thing I'm going to do is go back to my introduction question bank and add my question. I think I'm going to make it the first question that they'll answer, because if they respond with no, then they will not really need to answer any of the other questions. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it underneath my text entry here, my description. And I am going to write, did you experience any of the programs, services, or resources that UW Extension offered this past year? I'll go ahead and add my options, and really I'm just going to do yes and no, and I'm just going to take away those other two options. So here's my question here. And so I want them to end the survey if they say no, because again, what's the point of them continuing the survey about Extension if they haven't experienced Extension? So if they say yes, they'll continue forward. If they say no, then the survey will end. So I'm going to set up this logic just like I would set up the display logic. I'm going to click on the question, I will scroll down to the actions, and I'm going to add skip logic. Once I do that, it will come up with these conditions, and the condition is actually going to be if they choose no, if that is selected, then we are going to skip to the end of the survey. Notice with skip logic, there's lots of options I can do. If I click on yes, and that's selected, then I could say that they are going to go to the next question, which in this is technically labeled question 1. But I'm going to make it easy for myself, and simply enough, if they click no, then it's going to be the end of the survey. Once I do that, I'm going to click done. And now this condition has been set, and it's been indicated by this purple box right here. So that is how you add skip logic. There are a few additional basic features of Qualtrics that are helpful. You may notice in your survey that every time you create a question, it's given a number. When you move or delete questions, the numbers will still stay the same. So for example, my first question is technically Q7. My second question is Q13. And that may bother you like it does me. And so you can actually renumber these questions in any way that you like. You can do that by simply clicking on the question and renaming it that way. Maybe you want to put numbers in it, letters in it. You can do that simply by naming it. You can also have them renamed automatically. And you can do this by going over to the Tools tab and then clicking Auto Number Questions. If you choose that option, it'll come up with a few different options that you can display along with changing the prefix. I'm just going to go ahead and keep the sequential numbering and click on that. And once I do that, now question 1 is Q1, Q2, Q3, and so forth. So that's how you change the question numbers and their titles. Your survey also has an IQ score. This is a handy feature because Qualtrics will help determine how good your survey is. Each question has an IQ score based on its design, accessibility, and responsivity to mobile devices. You can click on the IQ score to see suggestions on how to make your questions better. There's a couple ways to find the IQ score. If you look at each individual question, if the question has even a slight issue with its potential IQ, then you'll see the orange IQ box next to it. If you click on that, it will give you a recommendation for what you can do differently. For this particular question, it's talking about the number of text entry boxes and how 3 text entry boxes tends to be the most proficient when creating surveys. And so this one already has 3, and I have other questions that have text boxes. So what it's saying is that maybe I should eliminate some text boxes. You can choose to fulfill the recommendation, or you can still continue doing whatever you want. This one is going to be a minor recommendation. If I continue going further, I'll notice that this question also has that IQ label on it. If I click on it, its recommendation is going to be about optimizing questions for mobile devices. And so what this one is telling me is that oftentimes mobile devices have a harder time with matrix questions because of the way that they are set up. So this is something that I may want to change. If I want to see the IQ of the entire survey, I can go to the top right corner of the survey and look at the IQ score. Notice overall it's green and it says great, which means overall I have a great survey. But if I click on that box, it'll give me a lot of information about the IQ of my survey. And it tells me that it has 3 ways to improve this survey. And it's going to show me what the options are and how great or minor those issues are. And so it looks like I really only have 2 minor issues, and we kind of already talked about that a little bit before. It will go through certain settings to see if you've passed them, which will help determine the IQ score. So right now, I'm not going to worry about the matrix for mobile devices, and I think that my text entry boxes are fine because they're small and they're not required for a lot of typing. So I like the IQ of my survey, and I think I'm going to continue moving on. But this option is really great for you to truly see how good your survey is depending on certain factors. I also suggest that you take a look at the survey flow from time to time to make sure your survey is going in the right direction that you're wanting. This is especially important if you add any branching logic like I've done so in our example. As you create more questions, you want to make sure your survey goes the way you want it to. And this is just a great visual example that shows what your survey is doing. You can also set up email triggers to notify you when a survey response has been submitted and to even send to your respondents after the survey, since this is not a default setting. The easiest way to do this, to create an email trigger, is by going to the Actions tab on the top left corner. Now, when you click on the Actions tab, if you haven't created any triggers yet, it'll take you through a simple process. So the first thing I want to do is click the Add Action button. Then I'm going to choose if I want it to be a scheduled action or an event-based action. A scheduled action would come out at a certain time. Event-based would be based on a certain decision that is created. So I would like to create an email trigger that sends me an email every time someone responds to my survey. So this is going to be an event-based action. So I'm going to click Event Action, and then I'm going to choose the event that starts the action. So that event has 2 options. I can either choose a survey response if it's been received, or through Facebook Messenger. So I'm going to choose when a survey response has been received, and I'm going to click Response Created because I want to know when someone has initially completed the survey. I can also choose if they updated their survey or answered questions differently. I can get an email sent that way as well, but I'm going to choose the initial response that's been created. Then I'll click Finish. Once I do that, I'll need to know, once the action has been created, what needs to happen. And so you can also add conditions here. So if I wanted to add a condition, I could say that if they answered all of the questions in the survey, then I want the email. Or if they didn't answer one question, then I want the email. Right now, all I want to do is create an action saying that if they responded to this survey, then I want an email knowing that. So I don't want to create any conditions, but I do want to add the task, which is actually sending me the email. So I'll click on Add Task, and when I do that, a lot of different tasks pop up. And I would like to simply just have an email sent to me. So I'm going to click that button, and then this is where you need to fill in specific information. Where do I want that email sent to? Well, I want to receive the email, so I'm going to send it to my own personal work email. We also have information about where it's from and the name and the reply to email. And for this, we don't really need any information, but I do want to point out that naturally it does the Q email server, and that could potentially be flagged by the university, and you may not be able to receive it because it could become spam. So what you should do is change it to the qualtrics.uyo.edu address, because that is going to come through your work email no matter what. So I'm going to change those there. I don't need a reply address. My subject is simply going to be survey complete, or you have completed a survey. That's just what I want to choose there. So survey complete. You can choose the time of when you want it sent, and I'm just going to say immediately. And then you can choose the message that you want to be sent. So again, I want this email because I want to know that someone has completed my survey. So I could simply say, someone has completed your survey tutorial training survey, and then that will send it to me. But I can also make it go an extra step, and I can actually have this email tell me who has sent me this survey. And I've set that up nicely because one of the questions in my survey asked for name and email address. So what I can do is make this a little bit more personal, and maybe I want to see the first and last name of the person that completed the survey. That way it's easy for me to maybe log that information. So what I can do is go over to this A bracket, and that's going to pipe information from a survey question. I can do it from all these different options as well, but for my purposes, I'm going to choose a survey question. And I want to take that information from the personal information that I asked for in question 3. And I'd like to get the first name of the individual. So if I click on that, now when I get this email, it's going to send me the first name or the name that someone had put into that field. I also want to know their last name. So I'm just going to add a space because this is going to become their first name. And I want to also add their last name. So I'm going to go to survey question, question 3, last name. And then I'm going to continue my sentence and say that they have this person has completed the tutorial survey. And now this is going to generate an email that sends directly to my work email and tells me who has completed the survey. And I'll click save, and that's how I create an email trigger that sends the creator an email response. This feature may also be useful if I want to know when a respondent answers a question in a certain way. You may have noticed in previous videos that I created a question asking people if they were satisfied with the service they experienced from UW Extension this past year. So naturally, I'd like to know when someone has responded that they aren't satisfied so that I can reach out to them to fix any problems. So in order to do this, I'm going to create a new action, and I'm going to do it very similarly to how I did the first action. So the first thing I'll do is click on the Add Action button, and then I'm going to choose an event-based action, and then I'll go through the same process. So I will choose an event, and this event is going to be when a response is received because it's for a specific question. And I'd like it to be when the response was created, and click Finish. And this time I'm going to actually add conditions because I only want this response when a certain condition has been met. So I'll click Add Conditions, and then I'll have the option of adding if any of the conditions are true or if all of the conditions are true. And I'm going to choose any for this option. And then I'll click on adding a new condition. So the condition type is going to have these options here, and I'm going to base it off of a question. And then I'll choose that question, which happens to be question 6, how would you rate your experience? And then if you remember, it was a matrix question, so there were a lot of different options here. So I'm gonna have to add a few conditions because I want to know if they are somewhat dissatisfied or extremely dissatisfied for any of those different options, which was quality of service, helpfulness of educators, and accessibility of resources. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with quality of service, somewhat dissatisfied. And then I'm going to say that that is selected. Then I'll add another condition, and I'll go through that same exact process. So it's a little bit annoying that you have to go through this process multiple times. Okay, so now that I have all of these conditions, I'm going to say if they chose any of these options, I want an email. Because if they are not satisfied with any of these things that we have done, I want to know about it. And so I will click on Done Editing. And now that I've created those conditions, now I have to set up the email task. So I'm going to click the Add Task button. And when I do that, once again, I want an email sent to me. So the email is going to be my email. That's what I'd like. Once again, I want to change the email address coming from qualtrics.uio.edu. That way it doesn't get flagged. And then this subject, I think I'm going to say just not satisfied. That way I know that this question is directly related, or this email is directly related to the respondent not being satisfied with our care. I want to know immediately, and then I'm going to choose the message that I want to send. So once again, I would like to know who it was that responded this way, but I also want their email because I want to reach out. And so once again, I did create a question for this in the survey. So I'm going to go to the piped text option, and based on the personal information question, I'm going to add first name, space. Once again, I'm going to add last name, space, and I'm going to simply write responded. They are not satisfied with our services. Please respond. Please reach out to them to fix the problem. So that reminds myself, and then I'm going to go ahead and add their email here so that it's a simple process, and you can't see this, but email address pops up, and so it will send me the email address that they responded to. Now, I can also simply send an email. Maybe I'm the survey creator, but I want this email to be sent to somebody who delivered the survey, and so maybe it's one of the educators. And so I can just change the email address that it sends to, and then it will send to that appropriate person who can reach out. But either way, I have all this information in here, and I can click Save. And so now I've set it up with conditions that when someone responds to a question in a certain way, it will send me an email with their name and their email address so that I can respond to them accordingly. I can also create an email trigger to send respondents an email after they've completed the survey. Maybe I'd like to thank them for their response and inform them of our website or an event coming up in their area. So to do that, I need to go through the same process I did when creating the other actions. This one's just going to be a little bit different than the previous actions. So click on the Add Action button, click on Event Based. Once again, I'm going to choose the event, which will be based on a survey response. This will be the initial response created, or I can choose response updated. It depends on what I'm trying to do. Right now, I just want the response that's created and click Finish. And this email will naturally be triggered when the survey is completed because that is just the default setting. Now, with this sort of action, I don't need any conditions because the survey is just being completed. So I'm going to add the task of sending the email. Now, this is where it's a little bit different than the others. Before, I wanted an email sent to me based on what the respondents are doing. Now I want to send the respondent an email. So this is where it's very important that I create a question in my form that requires them to submit their email address, because now I can go to the piped section here and I can choose the survey question, which was question 3. And within that question, I ask them to provide their email address. All I have to do is click on that, and now it will send the email based on that address that they had submitted. It's also going to be different in the From category, because now we want to send them an email from the appropriate Qualtrics email, but it doesn't necessarily have to be from one of our own actual work emails. We do want to make sure that we change it to the qualtrics.uio.edu. That way it is coming directly from UIO and it doesn't appear to be spam. If I'd like, I can add a name here. So maybe I do want to say UW extension. That way they see that it is more of a legitimate email. Then you can create your subject. For this one, I'm just going to have you completed a survey because that's simple. I want it to send out immediately after that survey has been responded to. And then I can come down here and I can create my message of what I want to say. And so you'll notice that there are a lot of different options that I can do. It's just like any other message type creator. So maybe I want to say, thank you for completing this survey. please make sure to go to uio.edu/UWE to see what we are up to at UW Extension. Maybe you want to add an image, maybe you want to add an actual hyperlink to there, which you can do. That's pretty simple. I don't need to explain that. But that's how you create this email message. So now I have it set up where every time a respondent actually submits the survey, they will get an email pretty much just saying thank you and giving them information. I'll click on save, and now that's been created. Now, if I click on the tasks button up here, then it's going to minimize these tasks here. Notice how each task has a name, and I did change the names to the tasks that we created earlier, but just so you know, it's very simple to edit this. You can just click on the name of it and you can change it. So now I'm going to change this to send email to respondent, and that is going to be its name. And so now I've created 3 separate email triggers that will be sent based on survey responses. If you'd like to create a contact list based on information you've asked in the survey, you can do this by going to Tools, then clicking on Triggers, then Contact List Triggers. Once there, then you can simply fill in all of the fields as you would like. So the first thing I need to notice is that it's going to add a respondent to the contact list based on the survey complete. If I want to add a condition to that, maybe it's based on answering a specific question, I can change that. We've gone over adding conditions, so I'm not going to go through this part. But I am going to create a new contact list, and I'm going to do it through my own personal Qualtrics library. And I'll create the new list, name it. I'm just going to go ahead and name it Survey Training, and click Save. Now this is going to go to that list. I can choose to update those list members or unsubscribe them. Since this is a contact list I'm trying to create, I'm just going to keep the update button checked right here. Then I can fill in the fields that I want to for the list. I know that I have this information in a question that I've created in the survey, so I'm going to go through that process to get the first name based on question 3 in the survey and what they respond to for that first name box. I'll go through the same process for the last name. And once again, I will finish this process for the email address. Now this is the information that it will collect. I don't need to do anything else, so I'm going to click Save Triggers. Once I do that, this contact list is created, and I can see that list if I go to Directories from the top right corner of the page. Once I click on Directories, it will load that Directories page, and then Survey Training is this contact list I just created. There aren't any contacts in there right now because no one has completed the survey, but that will populate as soon as people answer that question, and I can click on this to see that information. So that's how you create a contact list. Once you finish creating your survey, you'll want to make sure you adjust the survey options to your liking. Simply click on the Survey Options button at the top and go through the items. Now there's a lot of items here that I'm not going to go over, but there's a few that I want to point out. The first one is the accessibility. Do you want your survey to be accessible to anyone or by invitation only? Also, do you want there to be a password that they have to enter in order to take it? Do you want to make sure that there's no ballot box stuffing and require that each respondent is only allowed 1 submission? Also, do you want the survey to expire at a certain time, or do you want it to be available forever? Lastly, the anonymized response button is also very important when you're thinking about anonymity. This one's tricky because you may not have any questions in your survey about someone's name or email address or any other information like that, but the survey will not be truly anonymous unless you check the anonymized response button, which makes sure that all that identifying information, including the IP address and the location, is scrubbed clean. So keep that in mind. I'm going to have it not be clicked because I am gathering specific information from those questions. So once I have my options set up, I'm just going to click Save, and now my survey is set the way that I want it to be. It's important to make sure your survey works and flows the way you've intended. In order to do this, click on the blue Preview button in the top right corner. Then you can complete the survey as you'd like. Notice that you'll see it on the web browser version and the mobile version. You can turn this on and off by toggling this button here at the top. If you'd like another individual to preview the survey, you can copy the URL in the web address and you can send that to whomever you want to test your survey. They do not have to have a Qualtrics account in order to test it. Once you've completed the survey or had people complete it for you, you'll receive any email triggers you created for yourself, and it will send any emails out to respondents if you set that up. You can even see the responses from your preview in the data and analysis section. These responses will be included in the data, so it's important to delete them before you make your survey active. To do so, click on the Data Analysis tab at the top. Once you do that, you'll see some of the information in some of your responses. Simply click on Tools, then Delete Data, Survey Previews. Once you do that, you'll click on the boxes and you'll delete all the survey previews. When you're ready to present your survey to your respondents, click the green Publish button. Read the description and note that your survey is about to be activated. This means you'll have to press Publish after making any changes in the future, or else the active survey will look like the last published version. In addition to publishing your survey, you're saving a new version of it. Add a description of the changes you've made. This can be whatever you like. Dates will automatically be stored with this version, so don't worry about adding date labels. I'm going to say Survey Tutorial version 1. Now your survey, once you click on Publish, it'll create an anonymous link that you can use to send out to your participants, right here. However, you'll also want to go to the distributions page to manage this process, which I'll explain in the next segment. Sometimes after sending your survey out, you'll notice you need to fix something or that there's some important content you left out. If you edit your survey after it's been distributed, the changes will not go live until you publish the survey. This allows you to carefully review all of your changes before your participants see them. The newest version of your survey will only affect new incoming respondents. Qualtrics makes it really easy to distribute your survey. Click on the Distributions tab to discover your options. There are two different ways that you can go through the process of distribution. You can either use the vertical tabs over here on the side, or you can also simply click the Distribute Survey button. I like the Distribute Survey button. I think it's a little bit easier to follow. Once I click on that button, one of the first things I can do is send it out through an email. And I can either send an email through Qualtrics, or I can use the reusable link and I can send that out using my own email system. I can also get that same link and I can send that onto a website and link it there. I can also post it on a variety of social media platforms, including Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I can make it accessible for mobile devices by creating a QR code, or I can even go through an online panel process. So these are all of your options to distribute your survey. One thing I do want to point out, if you choose to send an email through Qualtrics, you can click on that Compose Email button. And the only way that you can really do this effectively is if you already have a contact list created in Qualtrics, because it's going to ask you to select your contacts. So if you don't have a contact list, then it's going to be easier to send the survey out just by taking that anonymous link and using your own email server. But if you choose to do it this way, click your contact list, and then most importantly, you need to change the from address to the appropriate UIO Qualtrics address so that it doesn't come up as spam and it gets delivered where you want it to be. So you're going to go ahead and change that to no reply at qualtrics.uio.edu. And then you can change the from name. Maybe you want it to just say UW extension. And you can choose whichever reply email that you want, or you can even leave it blank. That way that they cannot reply. Then simply fill out the rest of the form options, and then they'll be able to click on the link through the survey here. So if you want to compose an email in Qualtrics, just keep in mind that there's a few things that you need to set up in order to make that happen. But if you want to send out an email using your UIO credentials through Outlook or whatever email you want to use, then simply just take that anonymous link and embed it into your email that way. So these are all of the options that you have. and you just need to choose the option that works best for you. The easiest way to see your survey responses is to go to the Reports tab. This will give you an overview and summary of all the responses organized by question. Now, if you're not already collaborating with someone and you want to share this report to other people, you can click on the Share Report button and choose which format you'd like to export the information. Then you can simply share it however you'd like. If you look at this information overall, on the left-hand side, you'll see the questions. If you want to see specifically what the data is for the question, you can click on that. Otherwise, you can just look at the information on the major part of the screen. So for question 2, it gives me a couple different pieces of information. And I have a bar chart here. I also have this standard deviation type chart here, and maybe I don't like that and I want it to be displayed differently. So what I can do is click on this, and a lot of options come up on the right-hand side. I'm not going to go over all of those options, but I do think one of the coolest features is the visualization option, where I can change how I want this information to be presented. So I like the pie chart idea. If I click on that, it'll now change that information into what I think is a little bit more visually appealing, but you can choose to do it however you like. If I don't like this information and I don't even want it in my report, then I can also go down to the bottom of that tab on the right and I can just click Remove Visualization. I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to. Once I'm done, I can go up to the top and click on that X, and I'm done editing that question. As I continue scrolling, I'll see once again another field for this question, and I can add a visualization or I can even add some notes to it. This may be important if I'm also trying to collaborate and share this with other people. Then I go to the next question, and this information is presented in more of a chart with their first name, last name, and email address. So I can go through all of these questions and I can see all the different ways that it has been put together. And it's just a nice way to see all of the survey responses in an organized and summarized fashion. If you'd like to see the raw data, then you'll want to go to the Data and Analysis section. This section is a little bit confusing. It's not meant to be a view of a summary of the data, but more so for individual responses. So if you notice, when I get to the Data and Analysis page, it does seem personally confusing. It starts with question 7, question 8, then question 2, question 5. I'm not sure why it doesn't organize it simply by question 1. However, there's some things you can do to change the information that you see. One thing I want to point out is you can click the Edit button. Once you do that, you can actually change the survey responses if that's what you need to do. You can also click the Tools button, and this allows you to delete any of this data. You can also choose which columns you would like to see. So this may be especially useful if maybe you just want to see the information for question 3, maybe question 5, or you can choose to select all of them. That's entirely up to you. So choosing columns might be something that's beneficial. You can also choose on the actual survey row. If you do that, what it will do is show you the survey responses for all of the questions for that one person. So I'm looking at a survey response of all of those questions. And if I scroll down, I can tell that this was Leonardo da Vinci's responses. And I can close that if I like. So if you want to add a column, you can also simply click the plus button next to where you want that column to be added. So I click the plus button. Maybe I want to add question 3 next to that, and I want to add the first name. Once I do that, it will now show me the first names of the respondents because that's the field that I created. So with the Data and Analysis, it gives you a lot of options to specifically see which data you want to see. You just have to play around with pressing the right buttons in order to see and not see the data that you want. Fortunately though, the most useful feature of the data and reports that you'll probably want to use is exporting all of the data you've collected into an Excel spreadsheet. This way you can see it all at once. So you can do that by clicking on the Export and Import tab and selecting Export Data. Now, if you're planning on using Excel for your exporting of the data, you need to actually click on the Excel tab, not the CSV tab. So there are a lot of different ways that you can export your information, but like I said, most people tend to use Excel, so make sure that you click that actual tab if you're choosing to use that. It may also be easier to unselect download all fields because this box could potentially show you all of the information that you may not want, including IP addresses. So if you uncheck this box, it'll actually show you only the information that you are asking based on your questions. So once you do that, you can click download, and then obviously it will go through a similar download process to when you download anything, and you can have that information accessible to you. If you have any further questions on how to use the basics of Qualtrics, please don't hesitate to contact me. Also, don't forget to utilize the following how-to resources as well. Go Pokes!